Hello, this is Axis and Insights. As for the latest updates, the ceasefire deal in Gaza between Israel and Hamas has been finalized. In a press conference in Doha, details were revealed. Peace advocates around the world are happy, and people in Gaza are celebrating. However, some Israeli right-wingers are furious. Hardliners like Ben Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich are denouncing this deal, calling it a surrender deal. They claim that if Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu signs this peace deal, they will leave the coalition government, which could mean that Netanyahu would no longer remain Prime Minister. Similarly, on January 13th, a debate took place on the Israeli right-wing TV news channel, Channel 14. Two of the biggest Trump supporters and Jewish zealots cautiously discussed how Donald Trump had given them an unpleasant surprise. They had supported Trump in the hope that he would endorse the annexation of the West Bank and provide cover for it. Instead, he is doing the opposite by pressuring Israel into a hostage deal with Hamas before the January 20th inauguration. Both the host and the guest on Channel 14 were confident that Trump was on their side. However, they were worried as to why President-elect Donald Trump was so determined to finalize the hostage deal. They called it a surprise accident because for right-wing Israeli extremists, Hamas taking of around 250 Israeli hostages gave them what they considered a golden opportunity to reshape Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. One thing it provided them was the ability to reoccupy the entirety of Gaza, to start settlements and build hotels on its beaches. They had even started selling plot files in Gaza, with Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law, reportedly interested in building luxury palaces there after visiting the area. Bezalel Smotrich, Ben Gvir, Israeli settlers, and American evangelical Christians were reportedly attempting to relocate Gaza's population to another country in Africa, holding conversations with several nations. It seemed these zealots were unconcerned about the hostages and were instead using them to advance their agenda. This mindset influenced their support for Donald Trump over Democratic candidate Kamala Harris in the U.S. presidential election, dedicating all their resources to his campaign. When Trump finally won, it was a time for celebration. However, Trump pressuring Israel for a ceasefire deal even before his inauguration seemed to them like an obstacle to their vision of Greater Israel. This raises the question, is Donald Trump truly committed to a peace deal and opposed to Israeli hardliners? His special envoy for the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, is tasked with implementing the deal. Is he such a personality? Witkoff's personality and actions will reveal whether lasting peace is possible. To assess this, we need to understand the details of the first phase of this ceasefire deal, which were revealed through reports in American, Israeli, and Arab media. According to these reports, the first phase of the ceasefire deal will last approximately 42 days. During this 6-week period, Hamas will release 33 hostages, dead or alive. If there are more than 33 living hostages, children, women, and the elderly will be prioritized. If there are fewer than 33 living hostages, dead bodies will be sent to complete the quota. For every living Israeli hostage, Israel will release 50 to 100 Palestinian prisoners, and for every deceased hostage, Israel will release 30 to 50 prisoners. This also includes 50 prisoners from a list that Hamas provided to Israel. The first phase will begin when Hamas provides the life status of the 33 hostages, and the Israeli cabinet gives its approval. Details of the timeline include the release of 3 hostages in the first week, with corresponding Palestinian prisoners released in return. This process will continue weekly, culminating in the release of all Israeli non-military hostages by the 6th week. At the end of this phase, Israeli forces are expected to withdraw from Gaza's population areas but will remain 1 kilometer inside Gaza's border. During this time, hostilities will cease as agreed upon by both sides, and 500 aid trucks carrying food and medicine will enter Gaza, distributed by civil organizations or the United Nations. Israel is also expected to leave Gaza's border with Egypt. This condition was demanded not by Hamas or Palestinians, but by the Egyptian government. Although Israel has not agreed to this fully, Egypt has guaranteed that it will stop weapons smuggling into Gaza if Israeli forces withdraw. A critical point is whether Palestinians living in plastic tents will be allowed to return to their destroyed homes. It is unclear whether all displaced residents of Gaza will be permitted to return, particularly in the north. This region remains problematic for Israeli forces, who face casualties every other day. It is also where Yahya Sinwar's brother, Mohammed Sinwar, leads Hamas as both its political and military commander. Netanyahu is reluctant to leave northern Gaza, viewing it as critical to his pursuit of total victory. Israel also insists on installing scanners in the so-called Netzarim corridor to monitor every single resident of northern Gaza. The fate of those flagged by these scanners would be decided immediately. The first phase of the ceasefire deal, agreed upon under the guarantees of Egypt, the US, and Qatar, involved Israeli and Hamas officials communicating through intermediaries. However, there may be a clause allowing Israel to conduct airstrikes during the ceasefire if its AI systems detect a security threat in Gaza. Hamas is demanding guarantees from Qatar that Israel will not continue airstrikes after the hostages are released, but neither Israel nor the US is willing to provide written guarantees. On November 30th, 2023, after a similar ceasefire, Israel resumed its genocidal campaign, resulting in over 65,000 Palestinians and dozens of Israelis killed to date. Hamas fears that once it releases all the hostages, it will lose leverage, as Netanyahu has demonstrated his disregard for hostages, whether dead or alive. Reports in Israeli media suggest that while Netanyahu may have agreed to this deal just in time to align with Trump's inauguration, he has privately assured hardliners that destruction will resume after the hostages are released. Trump's administration is filled with the most pro-Israel hardliners in U.S. history. Figures such as Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, UN Ambassador Elise Stefanik, and others share a staunchly pro-Israel stance, as they even continuously refer to the Palestinian territories by biblical names to justify the Israeli occupation. Witkoff has openly referred to the ceasefire deal as a hostage deal, echoing Trump. In December 2024, when Trump stood alongside Witkoff and threatened the Middle East, it was not for peace, but specifically for the release of Israeli hostages. While they have expressed sympathy for Israeli hostages, they have shown no such concern for the thousands of Palestinians killed or displaced by Israel's actions. The second phase of the ceasefire agreement involves the complete withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza. Hamas and Israel are expected to announce a period of sustained calm. During this phase, Hamas will release all remaining non-military hostages, and efforts to locate missing Israelis will begin. In exchange, Israel will release a larger number of Palestinian prisoners than in the first phase, with the specific numbers to be decided during negotiations in the initial phase. During this time, all Palestinian residents who were displaced will be allowed to return to the ruins of their homes, and humanitarian aid will significantly increase, with more aid trucks being allowed entry into Gaza. West Bank's Palestinian Authority will assume administrative control of Gaza to initiate reconstruction surveys. No Israeli forces will remain in Gaza, creating the opportunity for a peaceful transition and the possibility of rebuilding Gaza. This second phase, like the first, is expected to last 6 weeks. Following this, the third phase is projected to span 3 to 5 years and will focus on the reconstruction of Gaza. Funding for this reconstruction has been pledged by the European Union and several Arab countries, with additional contributions expected from other nations. However, some financial liability will also fall on Israel. By the end of the third phase, a roadmap for Palestinian independence will supposedly be presented, attached to the Abraham Accords. The roadmap is intended to provide a long-term solution for peace. A contentious point in the third phase is the fate of Yahya Sinwar's body. His final burial in Gaza has symbolic significance for Palestinians, as Sinwar is considered one of their most celebrated leaders. However, it is likely that Israel and the US will oppose the return of his remains, fearing it could reignite resistance and strengthen Palestinian morale. This will test Hamas or any future Palestinian authority's ability to negotiate the return of such symbolic figures. There are also fears that, after the release of hostages and the completion of the Abraham Accords, Palestinians will again be subjected to Israel's military aggression. As highlighted in a report by the New York Times, the number of Palestinians killed during the ongoing Gaza conflict is reportedly undercounted by 40%. This discrepancy underscores the devastating scale of human loss, which many believe has been grossly underestimated by the international community. The Gaza war has shaken global perceptions of humanity's capacity for both progress and extreme violence. Despite the agreements in place, there is little accountability for war crimes or violations committed during this conflict. Without a powerful mechanism to enforce these agreements and punish breaches, the potential for lasting peace remains tenuous.